Welcome, everyone. We'll get started in just a moment. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the second of our four-part webinar series, Cooling Conversations. Today's topic is Beyond Heat Alerts, Effective Engagement with Hard-to-Reach Populations. We'll be getting started in just a minute. My name is Eliza Amstutz, and I manage heat mapping campaigns at Kappa Strategies. Kappa is a community-focused natural hazards and climate adaptation consultancy based out of Portland, Oregon. First, I just want to extend my gratitude to everyone for taking the time to join us today. I'm thrilled to see so many familiar names in the attendance. And please, we kind of have the chat feature disabled today, so we might not be able to see your comments if you put them in there, but I'll tell you how to let us know about questions and answers. So before we begin, I'd like to do a little bit of housekeeping. So as you're listening to our panel of speakers today, please feel free to put any questions that you might have in the Q&A section. So you can find this at the bottom of your screen. You'll see a talk bubble icon with a question mark inside and a Q&A label. So please put your questions for our panelists here. And as we go through the webinar, you're welcome to read through the Q&A questions and upvote the ones that you might find interesting. There will be no live captioning during the webinars. So if you need captions, you can use the closed caption feature by selecting the CC button at the bottom of your screen. Now I'd like to introduce our facilitator, Vivek Shandas. Vivek is a climate researcher, educator, and the founder of Kappa. He'll serve as our facilitator for the discussion today. He'll introduce our speakers, moderate questions, and integrate key lessons from the presentations. So Vivek, I will pass it on to you.
Thanks so much, Eliza. Really delighted to welcome you all to this first webinar series that Kappa is hosting. It's occurring through one of the hottest months of the year. Where I'm located here, we just went through a mini heat wave, and I know there's folks all over the country that are experiencing this, and of course other parts of the world, including Western Europe and parts of Asia right now. These webinars are a means for filling a void in national conversations about practical solutions-oriented topics related to heat management. We had a hugely successful first event during last week's discussion, which focused on one dimension of Kappa's heat action planning model, which you see on the screen, hazard assessment, which is in the upper left. And that drew on simultaneously integrating environmental and social aspects of sensing heat. And we heard from folks from federal agencies, as well as people working locally at municipal scales. This week, we turn our attention to a second component. If you go to the right side, community engagement within the heat action planning model. In the coming weeks of our series, we'll focus on intervention strategies and then implementation guidance as next week and the following week kind of wraps up this hub and spoke model that we have. While we may know that heat kills more people than any other natural hazard, we often don't know how to reach communities that are hard to reach. We In fact, our current approach of engaging communities occurs through public heat alerts, which take the form of heat advisories, heat watch, and various other strategies, often starting with a declaration by the National Weather Service. And then from there, local municipalities take action and send heat alerts out. Yet, despite decades of heat alerts, we're still seeing record numbers of mortality and morbidity during heat events. So this week, we are really, and I'm personally very excited to hear from these three presenters who are coming from different sectors of folks working on heat, nonprofit, municipal, and consulting. And they're going to draw on their unique approaches to engaging those who are hard to reach and examples of strategies that have proven to go beyond heat alerts. So I'll introduce each of our three speakers just before they take the virtual stage, beginning with Carmen Caveza, sorry, Carmen, and then up with each of those, I will respond to specific questions. I want to introduce Carmen first, who Carmen is a senior climate justice organizer for the Coalition of Environment, Equity, and Resilience, CEER, based in Houston, Texas. As a medical graduate with extensive experience working with underserved communities, Carmen has lived in several states and has met many different people involved in the environment and sustainability movements. Carmen moved to Houston just before Hurricane Harvey and was confronted with Houston's many environmental justice challenges, which ignited her desire to be active. Through these direct engagements with communities, she understands the impacts that humans and industry have on our natural ecosystems. By focusing on policy solutions and shifting the power dynamics, Carmen's work brings the voices of the most impacted community members to decision makers to empower communities in the front lines to advocate for themselves. Carmen, I'm going to turn the virtual stage over to you.
Thank you so much, Vivek. And let me just share my presentation. Bear with me. Can you see this?
Yes, looks good.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to be talking about effective engagement to hard-to-reach populations regarding heat. My organization is the Coalition for Environment, Equity, and Resilience. So this organization was born after Harvey. We are a coalition of 30 nonprofits that raise awareness between the connections between pollution, place, and the public health. These are all our members' organizations, and we have a lot of knowledge in this coalition. We have grassroots organizations. We have organizations involved with recruiting people and signing up for voting. We have environmental, we have conservation. So we are a very powerful coalition, but we are also a small team of 6 members that manage the coalition and manage 5 campaigns. This is how we guide our work. These are our values that guide our work. And the one most important here is how impacted residents are experts in their life experiences is data. And I'm going to be specifically speaking about my campaign. My campaign is the Climate Justice Campaign, and these are the components. So we have the climate ambassadors, which are residents that we hire and we train as climate ambassadors, and they connect us with their network and with their families. We have the Northeast Community Meeting, which is a community meeting that we held every other month, and some are virtual and some are in person. And this is the forum where we educate community, where we gather feedback, where we plan together, where we really ask community, what do they think about this initiative or a new grant that we want to do? Because everything that we do, we co-design with community. We also working on a disaster shelter and resiliency hub, and we have bring health partners into this space so they can help us advocate about the climate change and how that is impacting our health. And we are working on a home weatherization. This is our strategy to help communities become more resilient. And we developed a navigator program, which also our residents, they are helping us engage residents from different communities. We work in 5 communities in the northeast of Houston. And those residents come and we help them apply and refer to programs based on their qualifications. So this is all the things that we are doing for building heat resilience in the community. What we find out, it was a gap in the knowledge regarding heat. People are more concerned in Texas with the freeze. We have already 2 freeze events. And one was terrible, that we lost electricity for several weeks. A lot of people died frozen in their communities, in their homes. And this gets into the people's head as the most terrible weather event. And we find out that they were not that concerned with heat, even though heat is the #1 killer. And we find out too, the communities in Texas have normalized heat because it's so hot, and it has been so hot in Houston, and it's very humid. So for the communities, this is kind of the normal weather that they had experienced all the time. And so there was this gap in knowledge that we need to address. And we start doing that in partnership with another members. One of them is the Houston Advanced Research Center. We did a heat mapping with them. We also did a mini stress campaign, heat stress campaign. We did a report, and we continue engaging communities. But I want to explain to you, how do we engage residents? How do we get this, to start doing the pilot program with the weatherization, to continue doing these monthly meetings? How do we connect with community? And there are many frameworks, and there are many ways that you can connect. No one is perfect, I can tell you that. And you have to do what it works for you. But what I'm going to explain here is my personal experience engaging community. So the first time that I talked to a resident about climate change, because my campaign was very specific about climate change and how it was impacting the community, the resident thought I was a reporter. And when I told her that I was not a reporter, that I wanted to learn about how community was experiencing climate change, she told me, "Is that about the polar bears?" And then finally she told me, "Lady, I don't know anything about climate change, but let me tell you, we are dying of cancer." So right there, I stopped talking and I started just listening. What is happening in your community? The second thing that I learned how to engage community is to build relationships. After listening to this resident, I just find out that I couldn't just come to the community and start talking about climate change when I didn't know anything about the community. And I start going to every food drive. When I get hired to do this work, the pandemic just had started. And it was very difficult based on the framework that they have told me and how to engage community when the pandemic had just hit and we couldn't meet in person. So I have to develop a new strategy of how I'm going to go to these communities and start talking about climate change, because that was the goal. Have residents start talking about how climate change was impacting their health. And I couldn't do it. I really couldn't do it. So I started going to every event that the communities in the Northeast Houston had. Food drives, vaccine drives, anything that the community was organizing, start connecting with the leaders that they already were doing some work. And through them, I start building these relationships. The picture right here in the upper corner on the left is my team right now. We recruited 14 residents and we start training them as a climate ambassadors. But it was a very slow process. Building these community relationships takes time. And if you are not willing to put the work and the time that it takes to build those relationships, people are not really going to listen to whatever message you have to say. This is another example of where we go with these ambassadors. We start talking to residents, we start knocking doors, we start telling them about climate change, and we develop along the way what it works, what it didn't work, because it was a very different, we have never experienced anything like the pandemic. And it was very difficult to talk to people and to really start building those relationships. And the third thing that you have to do in building these relationships is earn their trust. It's not just enough to go to the community and start talking to the leaders and build the relationship, right? You have to really earn their trust. You have to get to know what's happening in each family here, what's happening in their lives, what are the issues that they are concerned with. I can tell you that the person on the top left, she almost drowned during Harvey, and her concern was related to flooding. And everything that you were telling her, it has to connect to it, what it was more important for her. And the bottom corner, these people on the blue house, she lived in a house that it was also damaged by Harvey, and it was full of mold. So she was not ready to learn about climate change when her house was really falling apart. And the lady here in the porch, she almost died frozen during the winter storm Uri. So all these people, they have so many things to say. And unless you take the time and listen and earn their trust, they're not really going to be able to move into any direction that you want to take them if you don't prove that you can be trusted and they can really confide things to you. The fourth point that I want to make here into engaging communities is you have to educate. Educate is a way to give them power, and you have to do it in a way that is relatable to them, right? Any information that you bring here, you have to remove all the jargon. In my medical field, I used to kind of really translate the medical jargon to information the community will understand, and that's exactly what I started doing here. I was showing them how climate change show up in their neighborhood so they can understand how they were being impacted. I was talking about the vulnerabilities of climate change, right? And show them examples of why this was more important. The other thing that I want you to kind of keep in mind when you want to engage the communities regarding heat or any other issue that you want to engage with is you have to let them lead. You cannot come from the top down. I used to do that in my medical field. So you have to unlearn a lot of the things that you usually do in engaging other communities. When you really want to earn their trust and be an equal partner, you have to let them lead. So we did that, educating first community about climate change, and then we did 600 surveys. And from there, the policy solution came. The community told us what they want here to work on. So this is a policy solution that we are working on right now, and is also our strategy to build heat resilience in the community. We are working in weatherization and energy efficiency measures on homes that they are really being left behind. So there are homes from the 1940s in the Northeast Houston that they don't have air conditioner, and they are not made for this type of weather. So what are the best practices that we have found out working with community? Building relationships takes time. You have to use a bottom-up approach. You have to embrace diversity. Everybody from a different culture had a different thing to see life and their different experiences and reach whatever strategy you are building. You need to unlearn to be able to learn. You need to listen. I cannot really stress how important is this for building relationships with the community. You have to be flexible. This type of work advances at the pace of trust. This is how I always see this work, right? Sometimes it's one step forward and sometimes it's 2 steps backwards. So, and you also have to recognize the residents are the experts and their life experiences is data. Excuse me. And in doing so, you center the residents as part of this strategy. So I want you to really keep that in mind when you bring an initiative. You have to come as an invitation to this type of work and ask them, is this really something that may work for you? How can you see this implemented in your community? And you should let them speak. You should really bring them into the table where decisions are made, whatever strategy that you're going to be implemented or that you want to ask. And that's all I have for you.
All right. Wonderful, Carmen Cabeza. I appreciate the focus on process, and I'm really grateful for you to emphasize these 5 themes that you had really led with. I'm really wanting to hone in just a quick question about the ambassadors. That seems like they seem like the means by which you can take it from individual. Building trust takes time, as you're saying, a lot of the other things. So the ambassadors allow the community members to have somebody to the residents to have someone to talk to and to be relating with, which also seemed to be a key piece of this. So I'm curious about your process for recruiting ambassadors, and then if you have a little bit of time, just how you went about training them, and what did you give
Yes.
them in terms of preparing with building trust and all these other components that you mentioned.
Yeah, Vivek, thank you for the question. The ambassadors were residents that I met during those food drives, and I start talking to them about climate change and if they would like to participate and be part of the SEER group that we will be educating community. So after recruiting 14 of them from the 5 communities that we work in the North, I put together a curriculum of what was climate change, what are the consequences of climate change, and what are the possible solutions, so they can really get an idea of what we're going to be talking to the community about. And so those residents were really on all venues of life, right? There were older people, there were younger people, and there were people who have never really thought about climate change. So it was a long process to educate them. I rely on our SEER members to put together the curriculum and presentations and give them the tools that they needed to start talking about climate change. So this program, we receive extra funds from Cressley, our funder, to create this program, and it's a paid program, a stipend program, because we recognize that residents in those communities, there's a lot of need. So you cannot ask them to put up so many hours of work when you are not compensating them. So we created as a stipend program, and we created a community agreements contract that this kind of an MOU that we put together. It's like, this is what we want you to do, and this is how you're going to be compensated. We give a stipend for gas, and we give a stipend for telephone and internet. And this is something that during the pandemic, it was incredibly helpful for the community. And the funders recognize that. And that's part of our advocacy, that we try to get the funders into this mind frame that community needs to be part of that, but they need to be compensated. And also for our research partners, we have research guidelines that we want them to recognize the data that we collect as equal partners, and we have to be compensated in the same way.
Wow, that's wonderful. I'm glad to hear about that piece around compensation, around almost hand selecting people for this particular role. That's an extraordinary effort. Can you say a little bit about how you brought in the coalition, like the broader coalition that was involved in this work? Were they involved in supporting the curriculum development, or were they just a means for getting the word out? Or what role did the other members of your coalition play in some of this ambassador and outreach work?
Yeah, so the work in a coalition is very collaborative. So we say we have this opportunity to apply for this grant, and whoever raised their hand is from the coalition members are the ones who would like to participate in that particular program. So we have 7 members, they participate in my campaign, and they were the ones guiding me to create a curriculum. Again, my background, it was in healthcare, and I have never really get much experience or exposure to environmental justice. So they need to educate me too, and then educate the team. So we put together a curriculum, and there were people from Air Alliance, which is focused on air. And so that training was just focused on air. What is the pollutions more prevalent in our area and how to affect our health? And there was another one regarding the soil, and there was another one regarding water. And then there was another one about advocacy in Austin and what that connect with policy and how policy is the solution to change things. So all those members, they help guide this work, and also the Climate Justice Committee member who also bring community leaders into that space. So all of them, they advise me, and then together we put this program, and that's how we create the curriculum, and we move forward with that.
Wow. Wow. Is it still going?
It's still going. And now from the heat resiliency program, we created another program what we call navigators, and we recruited 10 more community residents. And again, with the stipends, with an MOU, we trained them about what it was energy efficient, how that was in a strategy as climate change, and how climate change, we're still working on how climate change connect with the bigger picture, right? Because we talk about climate change as the umbrella of how climate change is going to make everything worse that the community is already facing. So it's a lot of training, a lot of education, but everything is co-designed, because when we bring them, we bring that as a partner. It's not like, oh, you know, you're going to be just working for us 25 hours a month. Yes, they really are the ones leading the work and connecting this work with the communities. We have engaged over 1,000 people for this program and over 300 referrals. And I couldn't do this work without them.
Yeah. Wonderful work, Carmen. Thanks so much for sharing it with us. And Zachary on the CAPA team has put searhouston.org website. If you want to follow the organization, there's specifics about climate justice campaign that's there, as well as email. Carmen has generously offered for any follow-up as well. And just a reminder, there's a Q&A option for attendees to be able to ask additional questions, which I'll be monitoring and kind of probably following up with a broader panel discussion after we hear from all three of the panelists. Again, thanks so much, Carmen. Yeah, we'll switch to our next panelist, Highland Edelman, who is a Climate and Health Program Coordinator at Washington County Public Health, located in Northwest Oregon, in the Pacific Northwest. Highland supports the development and implementation of climate adaptation strategies for Washington County. One important aspect of this work entails working with culturally specific community members to understand their strengths and needs to develop policies and programs that support their resilience to climate change. In the decade prior, her work has largely focused on community engagement, which is very consistent with our theme today, where she helped to develop equitable community engagement strategies for county government, mobilize communities to leverage collective power, and advocate for environmental progress and worker rights. So Highland, really thrilled to have you here. I'm going to turn the virtual page over to you.
Okay, go ahead and press present here.
Yeah, looks good.
Okay, great, thanks. So hello everyone, and thank you to CAPA Strategies for inviting me to join this series today. I'm going to be talking about how Washington County Public Health is approaching communications about climate events like extreme heat. As I mentioned, I'm Highland Edelman. My pronouns are she, her, and I work for Washington County in Oregon. I work in the Public Health Division, and I'm a Climate and Health Program Coordinator. So in my role, when I'm thinking about climate change and the way it impacts the community, I am thinking about it through a public health lens, which in this case, for example, is thinking about how extreme heat is affecting physical and mental health, and how we can help people learn to survive and thrive during climate events like extreme heat. So taking a public health approach to climate change means developing interventions that focus on prevention of injury and illness. And achieving health equity means addressing health disparities in populations that are most impacted by climate change, which are commonly referred to as frontline communities, or those who are affected first and worst by climate change. Just a little bit of data about how heat is impacting Washington County. So we currently monitor heat impacts through a few data sources like Essence, which collects data from emergency departments and urgent care. And we have been collecting and monitoring this data since 2016 and are continually expanding what data we collect and how. And these are just, a couple highlights about, from a health perspective, how heat has impacted Washington County. 15 people have lost their lives to extreme heat since 2015 in Washington County, and 9 of those were during the 2021 Heat Dome event, which, if you're not in Oregon or Washington, it was a weather phenomenon that trapped hot air over our region across several days, and consequently, we lost over 100 lives in Oregon. So we've also seen a significant increase in days over 80 degrees and significantly more heat-related illness visits to emergency departments and urgent care facilities as a result. And a review of 2024 visit triage notes from emergency department visits identified that many of these visits were describing housing and transportation instability that led to what would ultimately be preventable heat exposure. Last thing I wanted to note here is in 2023, we participated in a tri-county heat mapping campaign with Multnomah and Clackamas counties, our regional partners. And that was actually hosted by CAPA, and they were a huge help. So thank you for that. This mapping allowed us to understand which neighborhoods across Washington County feel the impact of heat to a greater degree than other neighborhoods. The biggest temperature difference we noted was during the afternoon shift from 3 to 4 p.m., which showed a 10.5-degree difference between the coolest and hottest neighborhoods. So the coolest being 81.6 degrees and the hottest being 92.1 degrees. Okay, I just wanted to throw in there before I talk a little bit about community engagement. I was thinking about this term hard to reach in the context of how we communicate important health information to the public. And what hard to reach means to me is that we, the communicators, experience barriers in being able to communicate information to a specific community of people. And that could be because of language differences between us and our audience, or visual or hearing limitations, technological limitations, things like that. But really, this is because most of the information that we want to share is created within the dominant culture. And what I mean by that is a lot of, public health professionals, or maybe folks who are working for, nonprofit or private sectors that are wanting to communicate with the public about climate change are predominantly native English speakers. They can read and write English. We're well-resourced and technologically savvy, and that's not always the case for our audience. So when we think about a population being hard to reach, really what we're saying is, they receive information differently than I do, or maybe you do, and they need to receive it in a way that works best for them. And I just wanted to call that out because I do think it makes a difference in how we approach the work of community engagement if we acknowledge our role in creating those barriers and some of the systemic barriers, and we see it as an opportunity for us to learn from the people we serve and how best to communicate with them. Okay. So informed communication is key. So Washington County Public Health has been working to create our county's first climate plan, which will include strategies for climate mitigation and adaptation. And we've been working for about 2 years with consultant Reed Group on community engagement to understand what community is already doing to adapt to climate change, what tools and resources they need, and what role they think the county should play in supporting community adaptation. So some of the things that we've heard and we're beginning to incorporate include having mobile-friendly digital content. So that's, things that people can just view easily on their phone. Language accessibility, utilizing a whole range of languages to produce our content. Using visual media like videos and imagery. Having hands-on activities so people can learn by doing. And then making sure it's culturally specific, and hopefully being able to create or have a peer in the community review the materials with you or help co-create them so that they're as culturally specific and relevant as possible. So just some examples. This is a heat safety comic developed by King County, Washington. They've been generous in letting us use this comic with our logos to share with the public. This includes some best practices like having imagery of diverse cultures, giving information that's specific to highly impacted communities, using simple and concise language, and it also comes in 11 languages. Another example, we've provided several trainings for community on heat and wildfire smoke safety. Some of these are with community partners, and some have been with nurse home visitors who work with families on health and safety. And some of the best practices we've included in these trainings includes hosting them in partnership with a culturally specific community-based organization and asking ahead of time, what is your community asking? What are their concerns? And then using that to guide the conversation. We all know what information we want to share, but sometimes what we want to share differs from what other people want to know. Materials being peer reviewed and offered in preferred language, slides containing only imagery or limited text, conversations that have been simultaneously interpreted into preferred languages, and then including those hands-on activities to create things like a DIY air purifier with materials provided to participants. And I did want to call out that ideally, an even better best practice would be to use the train the trainer model, which we plan to do in the future, to teach community-based organization partners who are reflective of the community they serve to deliver the trainings so that the content is not being interpreted, but is actually delivered in their preferred language. So one project I want to call out is a one that we just completed. We made 2 videos. We piloted this project in English and Spanish with the hopes of producing them in additional languages. We had some goals for the video were to share information about how to stay safe during extreme heat events with the community, ensure that the narrative resonates with community members by making the content culturally specific and relevant, and to show community members actually taking action to stay safe during extreme heat at home and in the community. And so, going back to what I shared earlier about themes from our community engagement, we often hear that communities want to receive information on their phone that can be shared with others through apps and social media. And we also know that government trust is not very high at the moment. And so rather than develop this script of heat safety tips from us, which we might utilize typically on fact sheets or in presentations, we wanted to hear how real Washington County community members actually stay safe in the heat and ask them to share those tips through the video. So the 2 videos, the English and the Spanish, they're similar. It's a similar format, but they do include different tips. And the Spanish video includes other features like music that is culturally relevant and tips that are more culturally specific to the Spanish-speaking community. And we also used a contractor to make these videos that is well known and respected in the area through her work with Telemundo. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and watch them. This is the English video.
Summers are getting hotter, and extreme heat can be dangerous, even deadly, to people and pets. So we asked Washington County community members how they stay safe during extreme heat. Here's what they had to say.
I like to leave my windows open at night to let the cool air in, and then in the morning I'll close them and close the blinds to keep the sun and the heat out.
When I bring my kids to the splash pad, I make sure to carry a bag with sunscreen and water. I have them take breaks, that way I can reapply sunscreen and have them drink water to cool down.
In the summer, when I want to play golf, I just make sure that I play early in the day and get done by 12 or 1 o'clock.
When I'm working, I take breaks in the shade, and I'm constantly drinking water to stay hydrated.
I wet down my hat just a little bit, and then I wet down the baby's hat as well before we take off.
During the hot weather, I make sure that I turn on the AC before I put my baby in his car seat.
When I know there's a heat wave coming, I usually freeze water bottles. That way, I have a quick way to cool down. I also like to lie on the ground because I know that heat rises and I can stay more cool down there.
I like to take a lukewarm shower to cool down.
To prevent my dog from burning his paws, I walk him in the mornings or the evenings. If you put your hand on the asphalt and burn yourself, your puppy could also burn himself.
You can get more tips for staying safe in the heat at staycoolwashingtoncounty.com.
Okay, and then now we'll go ahead and watch the...
Summers are getting hotter and
we will not be watching that one again. So we'll go ahead and watch the Spanish video.
Ay, qué calor está haciendo para mantenernos fresco. Estos son algunos tips que te voy a decir.
En la noche me gusta dejar las ventanas abiertas para que entre el aire fresco y luego en la mañana las cierro junto con las persianas para que no entre el sol ni el calor.
Pongo a remojar los frijoles un día antes para que se cosan rápido. Y ahora los acompañamos con una rica carne asada.
Con este calor vengo al parque a disfrutar esta rica ensalada de fruta.
En tiempos de calor, me aseguro de prender el aire acondicionado antes de subir a mi bebé. Cuando traigo a mis niños a los chorritos de agua, me aseguro de traer bloqueador solar y agua para que se refresquen.
Para evitar que se queme mi perrito, yo lo saco a caminar en las mañanas o en las tardes. Si usted pone la mano sobre el concreto y se quema, también se puede quemar su perrito. Vámonos, pa.
Algunos otros consejos para mantenerse seguros durante el calor extremo incluyen: en lugar de usar la secadora en días calurosos, cuelga la ropa afuera para que se seque. Si hace demasiado calor dentro de tu casa, busca un lugar fresco como una biblioteca o una tienda. Recuerda revisar cómo están tus amigos, familiares y vecinos, por si necesitan ayuda. Para más consejos sobre cómo mantenerse seguro durante el calor extremo, visita staycoolwashingtoncounty.com.
Okay. So hopefully, you can see through the videos that we use that for us, by us, or, nothing about us without us approach, where we ask people to share their real tips. And part of the editing and completion process as well, I wanted to call out, involved having community members and people who are part of these communities review the videos and offer their own feedback on everything from the captions to, is this relevant? Does it make sense? What's missing? And those sorts of things. So last thing is how we're going to be sharing these videos and information with community. Also utilizing some of that feedback from our community engagement sessions. We're going to be sharing these through trusted leaders in the community. So that could be community or traditional health workers. It could be community-based organizational leaders, folks who participated in the video themselves, and our contractors we work with that are well-known and trusted in the community. The folks who helped us on our heat mapping campaign with Kappa Strategies, we stay in touch with those volunteers and share information with them. Community-based organizations in general that we partner with, our regional partners, and then we've also used boosting on social media to specifically target people who are living in areas that we've identified as heat islands. So we're currently on like a little bit of a heat wave here in Oregon now, and hopefully folks are seeing that those videos in their social feeds. And that's all I've got. If you want to connect my emails here, and then I believe Kappa is going to share that as well.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Highland. Did you, as you were, just a couple of quick follow-ups, and I want to encourage other panelists to look at the Q&A. There's some questions, for example, specifically, Carmen, it'd be great for you about your project to address, and I'm going to build on some of the questions in the Q&A as well. But just Highland, to follow up real quickly, what did you find to be some using a trusted messenger model really is great to know in theory, though to actually practice it is something altogether different. So I'm curious if you found anything that was surprising or unique or a little bit maybe difficult, or anything that you might want to give a heads up to others who might pursue a similar route. This looks incredible in the way you presented it. So I'm wanting to kind of think about it also in the side of like, what might you suggest other people do if they're going to take on something like what you presented?
Yeah, I think something that's really helpful is to include folks from those groups from the beginning, to reach out and let them know, hey, I'm going to be creating this video. And I was just wondering, what are some of the things that you hear from community about questions they might have on staying safe or challenges they have. And, actually the folks that we sourced in the video came from recommendations from some of our community partners. We asked them to share with us, do you know folks who might want to participate in the video and share their tips? And so I think including people from the very beginning makes it a lot easier to share that out at the end and say, hey, share this with your community. It's really helpful and relevant. I think folks are more willing to share it if they've been included in the process, and it's not just like here's another thing we want you to, push out to people.
Gotcha. Yeah. Early and often. That sounds really important. Do you have any advice, taking from the Q&A, do you have any advice for, sounds like you contracted out for the videos, for various things. So what if a community or a municipality doesn't have resources to necessarily do that contracting? Are there ways that you might think about doing a similar thing, maybe on a, let's say, shoestring budget or a smaller budget than what you had, which probably wasn't large to begin with, is my guess. And curious what you think about that. Or have any thoughts?
We're definitely facing this challenge currently with, everybody needs funding, and there's never enough to go around. And so we really want to produce these videos, for example, in Arabic and Russian and East African languages like Somali, and it does require funding to do that. And so I think, what's helpful for me is now having this kind of template and knowing really like what we want to achieve with it and having those strong goals. I think it can be replicated by just using the materials you have. Most people have a cell phone and can record on their phone those tips. And there's free video editing software that you can use to string things together. And, to add captions and things like that, and to upload on YouTube. So I think that there's definitely ways to do it on that shoestring budget. And then I think the important part is, really including community. Sometimes community-based organizations have resources that you can partner to share and work together to use.
Great, thank you for that.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Highland. That was really insightful, helpful, and I was finding myself starting to dance a little bit too. So thanks for that.
It's really catchy.
Great little set of videos and background and context and description. I'm going to turn our attention over to Dana Hellman, who is a climate adaptation consultant and leads the resilience program at Kappa Strategies. In Dana's role at Kappa, she partners with clients on climate resilience initiatives, including planning, vulnerability assessments, community engagement, and stakeholder alignment. And she has a specific emphasis on, like this webinar series, solutions and action. Dana takes an integrative approach to climate adaptation work, drawing on a background in environmental and social science, resilience studies, and community planning, as well as practical experiences in local government, including public health and sustainability programs. Her projects commonly address climate impacts, experiences, and interventions for high-risk communities. Past consulting clients include federal, county, and city government agencies and nonprofit organizations. So I'm just delighted to have Dana, and a very interesting project that she's going to be presenting on today as well. So Dana, I'll turn the virtual floor over to you.
Thank you, Vivek. 1 second here. Let me pull this up. All right. Hopefully this is visible. Looks good from my end.
Looks good.
Awesome. All right. Well, hi, everyone. Again, I'm Dana Hellman, and I'm going to be sharing more of a case study example of a specific project that Kappa was involved in, working with residents of affordable housing to monitor summer temperatures inside their homes and also do some solutions planning. A bit of background, I do want to just start by acknowledging I'm here representing Kappa. We were one partner in this project, but this was really a collaborative effort. Could not have happened without our partners at the Portland Bureau of Emergency Management, Multnomah County Health Department, and Home Forward, which is our local public housing authority here in the Portland area. So this project stemmed from the 2021 heat dome, which Highland mentioned. This was a period of 3 consecutive days over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Temperatures went as high as 116, which is anomalous for our region. And there were dozens of fatalities in Multnomah County, which is the county that Portland is located in. And one thing that happened during this time, during the heat dome, residents of Home Forward properties, again, that's public and affordable housing properties, had access to what we would consider protective information and resources to some extent. Residents were getting the same public alerts that go out to the general public. Home Forward was distributing some information and warnings about extreme heat as this event approached. They had started an air conditioner distribution program to the highest risk residents in their properties. And many Home Forward properties also have on-site cool rooms, so public cool spaces that residents can access when it gets really hot outside. In spite of the availability of information and some of these resources, there were still multiple fatalities in Home Forward during the heat dome. And so this led Home Forward, Multnomah County, and the Portland Bureau of Emergency Management to ask, what can we do here? What's not working? What don't we understand? What's really going on here? How can we better protect the health and safety of this very high risk population of affordable housing residents during heat? And there was also just a general lack of data on indoor conditions. That includes quantitative temperature information, but also social and experiential data about what residents are experiencing that could actually guide action from all of these project partners. So that's where this all started. The project was called the Home Forward Indoor Temperature Assessment. I think Zachary may drop a link to the year 1 report, which is online. This project took place over 2 years. We studied 6 affordable housing properties, 3 in each year, and we engaged with tenants in over 90 residential units or apartments over this time period. Before I share the details of the project itself, I'll just share some info about how we did resident outreach and recruitment and how we got residents interested in and participating in this study, this project. So one thing I'll note, we had a little bit of an advantage in a way because heat was very top of mind for residents of Home Forward. Residents had been telling Home Forward management for a while that it was hot inside, it was dangerous, it was uncomfortable. They had lived through the heat dome. Many residents in the previous year who lived in the same buildings had gone through the heat dome, had seen neighbors become sick or even pass away during that event. So this was really top of mind. So what we did initially was, with the help of Home Forward building managers, distribute informational posters in public places around the buildings that we opted to focus on, and those were identified by Home Forward. We focused on properties that served elderly adults or older adults, over 65 years old, persons with disabilities, and in some cases, properties that had seen heat-related fatalities in the previous summer. So we hung these informational posters in public places, basically indicating this is the project we're trying to initiate, these are the partners. We're asking for residents to work with us to help us collect temperature data, to help us understand what's happening inside homes, what Home Forward and other partners can actually do about this, what's in it for participants, what we're hoping to get out of it as the project team. So that kind of primed everybody to know that this was coming. And then about a week after posters went up, we did a pretty big push to distribute invitations, printed invitations, taped door to door. So we determined that that was going to be the best way to get in touch with residents. Email or phone calls were not determined to be an effective way to reach out here. So we had CAPA staff, city staff, county staff, Home Forward staff, volunteers from a local program called Neighborhood Emergency Teams. And we went door to door to hundreds of doors and posted these invitations. And we learned ahead of time from Home Forward which tenants had language needs other than English, essentially. And we created invitations in Russian, Vietnamese, and Spanish, and distributed those in the appropriate language to specific tenants. And we also noted in these invitation forms a couple things. That participation was completely voluntary. Nobody had to do this. There would not be any negative repercussions for not participating. And they could leave the project at any time if they signed up. And also that they would be paid for their participation along the way. And I'll say a bit more about that in a minute. But based on this outreach and recruitment push, we had dozens of residents each year sign up through their building managers, in some cases more than we could actually accommodate in the study. So there was good resident interest in the program. This graphic on the right just shows the process diagram, the overview of what was done. So I mentioned we placed temperature sensors inside all participating units. We used something called the UBI bot sensor that had a couple different functions. It had a digital display screen, so residents could always see and keep track of the temperature in their own apartment. It was also constantly uploading data to an online platform that the project team could monitor, especially during extreme heat events. And one thing we wanted to try out with this project was whether it would be effective to do a really targeted in-home heat alert for participants. So the UV bots could actually give a few seconds of a chiming sound effect when the temperature exceeded 80, 85, or 90 degrees inside. So we were curious to see if residents liked that kind of really targeted alert and if it had any impact on their behavior. And I'll return to that a bit later too. Halfway through the summer study period, we distributed a survey to residents where they could share information about their experiences with heat inside the building, any physical or mental health impacts they had encountered, any coping strategies. So we really wanted to know what do people do with limited resources when they themselves get too hot or their home gets too hot or their pets get too hot. What are the coping strategies that are currently being used? And then much later in the year, after all the summer data had been analyzed and summarized, we brought all the participants back together for a series of workshops. And one purpose of these workshops was to just share back the data the temperature data that we recorded from each participant's home. So we were able to give a profile of each home so folks could see how the temperature in their home had changed month to month and day to day. We also use these sessions as a way to really co-develop solutions and intervention strategies that Home Forward could take at their building scale, but also that maybe the city or the county could contribute to support health and safety. So for starters, I'll just cover a few lessons learned. What I think worked really well, was very successful in this project and engaging with underserved communities in the public and affordable housing space. As I mentioned, we had an interdisciplinary team. There are many virtues to having an interdisciplinary team. I won't go too deep into that, but that was wonderful. We had Multnomah County Health Department and the Portland Bureau of Emergency Management providing essential funding to make this work happen, to make sure we could pay participants. We had Home Forward at the table who had literal access to secure buildings. They had access to tenants. They were a known entity. So if CAPA had just gone into an affordable housing property and said, hey, we want to work with you, we want to study you, that would not have gone over very well, I think. And having Home Forward be the go-between was really effective. And something I just want to highlight here is the fact that having city, county representatives at the table in this project and also having Home Forward part of this really, I think, gave the impression that this work had potential for action. So underserved communities, we hear often, are just, they're over-researched, they're tapped repeatedly to share their experiences and their challenges, and their participation does not always lead to some tangible improvement in their situation. So having county, city, Home Forward decision makers with decision-making authority at, for example, workshops, and really listening and taking things seriously helped to give some credibility to our project and really gain resident buy-in and feeling that something could come out of this. These are kind of general tips, but flexibility and accommodation, very essential when doing this kind of work. We did payment for participation at every step of the process, including hosting a sensor, taking a survey, and attending a workshop. And we did pay in cash. I recommend that if it's possible for your organization to do that. I know that's not always possible, but that's a really flexible payment system for recipients when possible. I mentioned we offered translation of materials and also offered translation at events as needed for specific participants. We did a lot of hands-on support with this project. We were working with sensors, which can be a little fussy. We did provide a user guide to participants for how to troubleshoot their sensors, but nevertheless, there was a lot of need for CAPA staff and Home Forward building managers to visit homes, troubleshoot sensors, change batteries, be on the phone, answer questions, and that's great. That's all just part of kind of making somebody or some people available on the project team to make sure that participants and engaged community members feel heard and supported and that they can stay involved. Meeting people where they are, also big help here. We did temperature measurements and surveys in people's individual apartment homes. We also did the workshops at public rooms within the buildings that we were studying, so people didn't have to travel too far from home. And this is really specific to this study, but equipment selection, flexibility and equipment selection came up for us. We needed to pick a sensor that did all the things we wanted it to do, that could run on a system other than Wi-Fi or Bluetooth, because Wi-Fi and Bluetooth weren't commonly available in this setting. And we needed a sensor that didn't look like it was recording video, that didn't look too intimidating. That was a real concern. And then I think the most important, exciting part of this work, and this kind of reflects something Carmen was saying, was having community members involved really as a partner in collaborative data interpretation and solutions planning. So we had this environmental data, which certainly pointed to a problem. It could show, yes, it's getting too hot inside, but that's all we could really glean from the temperature data. But by working with the residents themselves to kind of provide some context and insight into what was happening here, why do the data look this way? And getting their responses to that and help with interpretation, and then also really clear guidance from the resident community about what they did and did not want to see done in response to extreme heat inside. And then I think I'm probably approaching my time here, but quickly, since the theme of the day is beyond heat alerts, I just wanted to share a couple lessons learned that pertain to alerts and kind of validate the importance of this kind of deep engagement with high-risk populations. We found in this study that sometimes outdoor temperatures were not high enough to trigger an alert, but indoor conditions had already reached potentially unsafe levels. So this just highlights, potential differences in indoor-outdoor conditions, even outdoor conditions across an entire neighborhood or a city, and what that means when we have alerts that are typically based on citywide or regional outdoor temperatures. We found that targeted alerts are not a complete solution. I mentioned that those UB bots gave a chime sound effect when certain temperature thresholds were exceeded. Residents on the whole were not a big fan of those alerts. They found them maybe annoying, they ignored them, they didn't know what they were. We didn't hear a lot of stories about when I heard that sound effect, I did this responsive measure. And in fact, what we heard was, we don't need an alert inside our home telling us it's hot. We already know that it's hot here. And the problem is there's little we can do that we're not already doing. We need things that we can do. So particularly with this public housing population, we know there were many folks involved who had mobility limitations, who had physical or mental disabilities that prevented them from leaving their homes or just, kind of heat proofing their homes. So this identified the need for on-site options so that residents can actually do something when they receive an alert. They need options when they get alerted. And then just some tangible safety improvements that came out of this engagement. We found that the cool rooms offered by Home Forward were typically open during business hours, 9 to 5, but residents really needed the rooms to be open in the evening and even overnight. That's when they were experiencing highest temperatures indoors and really exposed to heat. There's a big push to distribute portable heat pumps for cooling throughout Home Forward, and we found those were not always really that effective at cooling apartments, and part of the reason was drafty doors and windows, ineffective sunshades that were letting too much sun in, issues with opening windows. So various tips that we received on how to make heat pumps more protective and effective. We heard requests for educational opportunities. For example, residents wanted first aid training so that they could protect themselves and their neighbors during extreme events. And we got a whole suite of building-wide solutions for Home Forward to implement, including things like window screens, tree planting, possibly establishing some kind of wellness check, door knocking or phone calling campaign. So just some findings there, and that is the end of my presentation. Thank you.
All right. Thanks. And your email address is there too, Dana. Thank you. That's great. Just to follow up, a couple of follow-ups real quick before we open it up to both Carmen and Highland as a panel conversation. This piece around the video with the sensor, there was some sensitivity around folks coming into someone's home and setting up equipment and things like that. So were there things that you found helpful in being able to deploy these sensors to assure folks that these were measuring temperatures? And just curious about how you manage that kind of privacy issue that emerges with some of these projects.
Yeah, I wish I had a sensor handy to show you all, but yeah, the sensor we ended up going with, if anyone wants to search for it, is called the UBBot WS1 Pro, and it's a pretty friendly looking sensor. It's about this big. It has a digital display screen, and it doesn't have too many lights or buttons or anything. We landed on that partly because of its functionality, but we found other sensors that had similar functionality, but just looked a lot more intimidating. This was part of the issue. There was one that kind of looked like a UFO, which Home Forward staff determined was just going to freak people out, and it just looked more like I don't know, an unfriendly scientific instrument, essentially. And so through various process of elimination, we ended up with the UBBot, but still the UBBot also, one of its functions is that it can record light exposure. So there's a small kind of sensor in the bottom corner that would typically record light. So one thing we did with those is just put a sticker over that for everybody's UBBot before we distributed them so that that wouldn't be visible and it wouldn't disturb anybody. And then we also made it clear in the outreach and sign up materials that this sensor is only recording temperature. It's not recording audio or video. Just trying to make that really clear. And then of course, responding to any questions or concerns that any participants had as we were setting those up.
Okay. And I want to just follow a question in the Q&A by Patricia here about indoor sensors and the disparity on temperature readings based on floors, and was it significant, and are there certain influences that you think may have played into the differences that you saw across units?
Yes, this is an interesting question. I'd love to do more studies to see what we find, but I will say in our studies of Home Forward, we had 4 high-rise properties that were participating. And especially in year 1, when we were in older buildings that were had less efficient building envelopes, we didn't see the difference that we expected. We expected higher floors to be hotter pretty much across the board. That really didn't happen. We found some of the hottest floors were sort of in the middle of the building. There wasn't a clear trend of temperature increasing the higher you go. And a couple things we found, thanks to, again, this collaborative resident-led interpretation of the data, was that maybe one of the big causes here was that folks on lower floors were actually less willing to open their windows during the day and night, especially overnight, to cool off because of things like street noise, fear of crime, fear of bugs coming into the windows, whereas residents on higher floors were, they didn't have those same barriers to opening windows and getting airflow through. And we're often talking about high rises that are surrounded by a lot of low profile buildings in Portland here. So there's a lot of airflow to be had, whereas our units on the lower floors were exposed to ambient heat at the street level as well. So just a couple things. There's more on that in the report that Zachary shared, but yeah, it wasn't quite as straightforward as we thought it would be with that one.
Not many things these days are as straightforward as they seem. Yeah, this is really interesting. For those of you, and there's a question here from Ingrid that I want to get to, is for those of you who aren't maybe tracking the indoor conversation, there are numerous, I'd say it's probably about a dozen, maybe dozen-ish number of municipalities and groups around the country who have created recommendations for maximum indoor temperatures. Most places, if not all places in the country, have a minimum threshold for temperature in their housing units, as you might know, of usually around 65 Fahrenheit, that any habitable space in a residence has to be able to get up to 65 degrees Fahrenheit, though rarely do we see the maximum temperatures. So in most cases around the country, temperature thresholds can go well above what is safe for a person to live in, and yet it's totally legal. And so there's been a lot of discussion about whether this indoor maximum temperature is something that's is a good policy, whether it's actually enforceable, whether it's implementable. So this study, I think, really speaks volumes to the fact that we have very little understanding of indoor temperatures, and that there are certain things that residents do to both amplify temperatures as well as cool temperatures. And it's a kind of a complicated thing once you get into someone's house. Though, Dana, in your work, do you know of any other policies, like Ingrid's question here, for California setting a California Department of Housing setting a recommendation for maximum safe indoor temperatures? I know there are recommendations, but are there any that go so far as requiring it from your understanding, or is that something we need to do a little more digging into?
Yes. The ones I'm aware of that are that have been passed into law are in Arizona. I know Tucson has a requirement for landlords to provide air conditioners and cool habitable spaces. And then I think perhaps Phoenix is the other. I'm not 100% sure, but Tucson definitely has requirements for that have been codified. And then I know, yeah, Oregon's kind of working on a similar bit of legislation that hasn't passed yet, but well, actually we have had some legislation to make it easier, at least for folks to get air conditioners into homes, but we're not quite at the point of requiring a temperature minimum in all housing.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Dana. Super interesting area. I'd love to invite the other two panelists, Highland and Carmen, to come back with your cameras. And I just wanted to kind of bring us all together to kind of have you respond to a few questions, thoughts, as it seems relevant to your work. We've heard a fair bit about the importance. So just to recap a little bit of what I heard: the idea of building relationships, engaging trusted partners, keeping the long view, keeping the messaging very relatable. And really, those are some core aspects of engaging hard to reach populations. And I will second the comment that was made in the Q&A in terms of Highlands calling out the fact, or the understanding that hard to reach populations are those who generally may not be getting information in the same way that a dominant culture might be accessing information, and that it's on the responsibility of systems and policies, and many of you who are organizers and researchers and community activists who are actively trying to get the message to communities. So I might start maybe with the idea of the role. We saw a video and we saw a set of sensors, and Carmen, you may have also engaged in this aspect of technology, the role that technology plays in engaging hard to reach populations. We're just immersed in many different forms of technology, whether it's surveillance cameras on the roads, or whether it's various forms of phones and other things in our private spaces. I'm curious about what you see maybe the advantages and disadvantages of different forms of technologies in terms of engaging hard to reach populations. Are there things that you would really encourage the audience to avoid? Are there things you would encourage folks to take seriously? I'd just love to maybe start there as a question for the panelists.
Yeah, and I can start. For us, technology is a big barrier. We work in communities that they are really very limited skill in technology. So the way that we have found that we can reach the majority of the people, especially seniors, that is very difficult that you can help them advance in technology, is through text. That's what basically we do. And a lot of the seniors, we communicate personally by phone. So that's why my network of 20 people right now, 10 ambassadors and 10 navigators, are incredibly important to help reach all those residents. This is the way that we invite to the meetings, sending texts, calling reminders, sending the link for Zoom. Some of them we had been able to advance it to that. But beyond that, it's more challenging with community. They don't have the resources. Most of them, they don't have email, so they don't check. So you have to really meet the community where they are. And this is how we have been able to meet the needs.
Okay, that's really helpful to hear. Thanks, Carmen. Other panelists, thoughts on this?
I feel like just diversifying is so helpful because, like Carmen said, I mentioned that we hear a lot from people that things need to be mobile friendly because most people are using their phones, which is true, but we don't always use them in the same way. We're not all using the same apps. So, just posting on Facebook or posting on Instagram doesn't mean you're going to reach everyone, even with like targeting or boosting. One thing that I was surprised to learn recently is that our Somali and Eritrean and Ethiopian communities here in Washington County typically use WhatsApp to communicate. And we don't have a Washington County Public Health WhatsApp, and so we rely on community partners who are in those WhatsApp channels with their community to share information for us. And so, diversifying and just always asking community like what they're using, how they're sending information out, and figuring out how you can kind of optimize what you're doing to fit that.
Thanks, Highland. Yeah, really interesting. Both the means of engaging and then trying to find community members using those means and then diversifying those means. Really interesting. Yeah. You want to add anything, Dana, or we can another question as well that I want to kind of get into?
No, yeah, we can move on. I want to just reiterate, yeah, diversifying is essential, whether it's going in person, paper, email, different apps, different news sources. I mean, the more, the better.
Yeah, that's great. So part of the challenge that I'm kind of wanting to also audience to maybe will appreciate is just doing the individual work with, for example, climate ambassadors or individual residences with sensors in them. It feels like the scale of the problem of just Washington County being 600,000 people, Houston being over a million, over several million people in the metro area, and similar to other regions, getting individual attention and the kind of trust building and engagement that many of you are speaking of. How does it seem like there's a mismatch between the level of engagement needed to do that trust building and relationship building and the scale of the challenge that we're up against in terms of the number of people who might be left out of that dominant culture messaging and heat alert system and other tools? Building on that technology question a little bit, I'm curious like how you think about in your day-to-day work as you're thinking about the scale of this challenge of reaching communities effectively. How do you square this like scale with the approaches that you take? What might be things if you could do, not necessarily that you're doing, what could be ways to kind of meet the problem and meet the challenge in the scale? And maybe I'm just making the problem larger than it is, but I'm also, and that's fine, but I'm just curious, like what your thoughts are about how you might meet that scale of a challenge with the approaches that you're taking.
I can jump in really quick. The way we do, because we have one campaign that is 5 counties, like you mentioned, Harris County is just 5 million people. And then we have one campaign that is another 5 counties. So this campaign rely on community leaders that they already have established that network. And we just come with them with resources, with whatever the campaign at that particular moment is doing in supporting the work that is already there. So that's one way that we can expand our footprint, right? The other one, we rely on our partners. So we have 30 members, right? And they are having also their own base and their own organizers. So when we need to expand the message to another community, we ask our partners, it's like, who is working in that area? We need to talk about this. And that collaborative work is really a way that we can expand and reach more communities. Because I totally agree. The WhatsApp is one way that we communicate with community. Flyers is another one. We are not very effective with a social network because again, the 5 communities in the Northeast are very limited in technology. But that network that we already had within our coalition is incredibly important to really push to different audiences the type of message that we need to provide, right? And so if it's like a younger audience, we have members that they have really toolkits that they can push really quick and Instagram and other social media platforms. And then we have another ones that they do translations so we can reach out to more diverse communities.
Thanks, Carmen. Other thoughts about this scale of the challenge and outreach?
I think Carmen said it best, like you can't do it all yourself, you know, so you have to rely on, you know, building relationships with people who can help you get messages out and who can partner with you to do the work because it's just impossible to reach everyone on, you know, our small teams. And the other thing I was going to add to what Carmen was saying was data can be really helpful in focusing your efforts if you're able to get data or even just reach out to maybe other community partners or organizations who might have data or use, you know, EPA databases or CDC databases to try to take a look at what are the populations that are being most impacted by, in this case, heat, or, you know, what are the populations where we're seeing them end up in the emergency room the most. And if you, while you're building those relationships and you know, trying to like diversify your efforts and expand them, you know, you can start with focusing on the populations that are being most impacted.
Yeah, I'll just follow on. I totally agree. And I think kind of building on that, not only can one entity not reach everyone, you just can't address every community's challenges all at once. And so part of it, I feel, is just trying to stay optimistic and thinking about, you know, we have certain opportunities that present themselves and following the opportunities that are available when they're available. And so if you have willing partners who can bring funding or relationships or engagement time, like, you know, just working essentially with what's available as it's available and trying to make the most of that while acknowledging that, yes, this is an enormously complex and multifaceted issue. And we're not going to address it as individuals all at once. I don't know, just trying to keep it in perspective is so helpful, I find.
Can I just add something to what Anna said? Bringing different partners bring different perspectives. Like one of our health partner is in the public health department, and he was very focused in outdoor workers. And that was a population that we were not focused on, right? So he brought that perspective, and then the conversation kind of expanded to include that group of people that they're very vulnerable, you know, the construction workers, the gardeners, all the people that they are working in the extreme heats here. And to build an advocacy, because the governor just has removed the breaks for water breaks during for those workers. So it's like you go against these kind of policies that they're very damaging. So awareness is even more important for those groups of people. So diversity is really, really important in this type of work.
Yeah, thanks, Carmen. That's really great. So what I summarize, like partnerships, really limited capacity, but partnering really helps. Being able to build on existing work that's already happening, I heard. And I also heard kind of when the constellation of actors, partnerships, and resources come together, claim it, like go for it, and kind of build from that. Those are really helpful tips. Thank you for that. There's a couple of questions or comments even in the Q&A window, if you want to take a look at those. I think there are very helpful comments in terms of creating community or citizen science programs. I think there's opportunities for K through 12 that you may be working with that you want to think about, and whether that's happening would be examples of that would be really helpful as well, if you want to take a look at that. I really want to thank Carmen, Highland, and Dana for just really setting a stage for doing on-the-ground work, bottom-up work with the community, for the community, really framing it up to be that, to meet the need of the time in terms of what a community may be facing. Many of us sit in very privileged positions like me, and I have access to ways to stay cool during heat, and I'm on all the apps and watch the weather sometimes too many times a day. And really, this panel is about trying to identify those communities that we might want to really engage in the non-traditional approaches that have been often part of a heat alert system. So I'd really like to transition us and get you thinking about our next session. Thinking about the next session, we have a Decoding the Danger, which is about designing accessible platforms for heat management. I will note that this next session will be debuting at least two heat management platforms for the first time. So encouraging folks to stay tuned for that. We'll be hearing from folks around the country again, and really excited about building on this process of going from hazard assessment to community engagement to then platforms that help bring more resources and understandings about heat. And Morgan, Brendan, Derek, and Zachary will be highlighting and presenting their perspectives from this. As always, I'm going to encourage you to check out Kappa Strategies on LinkedIn, on Instagram, on X. There's also very exciting to announce a Climate Current newsletter that's coming out from Kappa that will launch in August 2025, so next month. It's going to bring together a lot of these panel conversations, as well as lots of review the recent research, as well as activities happening in the space of heat management and also climate more generally. So thank you so much for you all for presenting. I really want to thank the attendees who stuck around for the full time here as well. Thanks for that. And we'll follow up by email. Thanks everyone. Have a great rest of the day, and we'll catch you next week.